My name is Sam Day, and this is my story. I was very grateful for when God came into my life. It was perfect timing. It was right before a near life and death experience that affected me for years to come. I grew up in Brazil. My parents were missionaries, and when I was about 11 or 12 years old, a best friend of mine came over to town, and his dad was preaching at the church. So after the sermon, my best friend just nudged me and said, "Hey, you want to go forward?" So I got up with him, and I didn't want to hurt his feelings, and came up in front of the church. Well, a few days after that, Dad was talking about baptism. Well, it just kind of dawned on me, you know what, I did a religious thing, but do I even have a relationship with Jesus or not? And I was going forward more because I didn't want to offend him and hurt his feelings. But thankfully, God used that as like a spur on a cowboy's boots that just spurred me to start thinking about my relationship with God and talk to my dad about it, and finally learned what it meant to have a relationship with Jesus, and I trusted in him on that afternoon in my dad's office. Well, it wasn't long after that I got real sick. They couldn't figure out what it was, and they started giving me antibiotics. Now here I was, 11, 12-year-old kid, and my fever was going up, and my internal organs were all swelling, and they gave me medicine. It wasn't working, so they upped the dosage of antibiotics like 11 times the dosage for an adult, and here I was, just a 11-year-old kid, and that could have really caused me some severe problems afterwards. Put me in IV, and I was in and out of clinics for 2 months and laying out in bed, and finally the doctor told my parents, "There's just nothing else we can do for him here. You need to send him back to the United States, but I can't guarantee Sam's going to make it alive to the United States." Well, we got on an airplane, and it was amazing how fast God got us back to the U.S. for some medical treatment. And it just so happened to be that on that very night I was flying back to the U.S. and I was leaving the city of Salvador, that there was a soccer stadium. If you think football here in Alabama is big, you ought to see soccer down in Brazil. And that stadium is a downtown area, and some churches were having kind of like a revival, big service down there, and had a speaker coming in to speak, somebody from the U.S. And so in the middle of that revival, somebody said, "We need to really pray for a missionary kid, because tonight he's on the airplane going back to the U.S. for medical treatment." So all these Brazilian friends and just wonderful folks, they got on their knees on that stadium, and they all prayed for this little missionary kid going back for medical treatment. I got back to the U.S., and the doctors put me through all the best and most advanced tests, and they still couldn't figure out what was causing my illness. But amazingly, even after they took me off all the medicine, no antibiotics, no nothing, all that medicine that was keeping the fever down, somehow or another, after 2 weeks, my body started fighting back, and I was healed. So that was a miracle that God did to spare my physical life right after he spared me spiritually. And it was a spiritual healing and a physical healing right around that time. The side effect of that, though, was because the antibiotics were so strong, it shot my immune system. And here I was running about 6 kilometers a day as an 11-year-old kid, and then after that I was sick. 2 years later I weighed less than I did when I first got sick. And if you do the math, it's 11, 12 years old, and then 2 years after that, for the next 2 years, here I was the small one, I was the runt of school, I was the skinniest, and I was the palest, and all those things that made me feel real, real small. Physically ended up making me feel very, very small, internally and emotionally. I thought everybody was bigger and stronger and better than me, and it gave me some deep feelings of insecurity and an inferiority complex. And for years I would struggle with that, comparing myself to somebody else. Oh, they're smarter, or they're stronger, or they're bigger, or they're this or they're that. And I always felt like on a seesaw, they were up high and I was down low. And it took through my teenage years and my adult years. Even now it comes back and haunts me. But what I had learned to do is, thankfully, because of that relationship with God, I started getting more and more my self-esteem from my relationship with God, instead of comparing myself from others. And it finally dawned on me, what is my value? Is my value going to come from comparing myself? Is it going to come from other people liking me, or is it going to come from success, outperforming others, or possessions? And I realized I couldn't rely on those things for a sense of self-esteem. I had to rely on God. And the beauty of it is I found my price tag. What was the value that God put on me? And you walk in a store, a pair of socks is a few dollars, and a diamond is several $100s. A car is several $1,000s. Well, what was my worth? He didn't pay for me in gold or diamonds. He paid for it in the most precious substance in the world, which was the blood of His Son. And the price tag that God put on me was the blood of God the Son Himself. Of more value than anything else in this universe is God, and He spent every single drop of blood in His body for me. And now I feel valuable. And now I know how valuable everybody else is because of that. And as you hear my story, I ask of you two things. One, do you have a relationship with God? Are you just doing a religious thing, or do you have a relationship? And if you don't, make that decision today. Don't waste another day without Him. And I hope you realize how valuable you are to God. To live life to the fullest, knowing that you're fully, deeply, and extraordinarily loved by the God of this universe.
This is my story. This is my song, praising my Savior all the day long.